I have to stop touching my face. Ay, ay, ay. Okay, so that's too bright. I have to stop touching my face. Ay, ay, ay. Okay, so that's too bright. I have to stop touching my face. Ay, ay, ay. Okay, so that's too bright. I have to stop. All right. I think we're good to go. So, hey, everybody, Jeff Salzman here. Welcome to the Daily Evolver. And a special welcome to those of you who are tuning in live via Integral Life or YouTube. I appreciate knowing that you're here. And today I wanted to share a conversation that I had with Dr. Keith about 4 or 5 days ago. And it's about a new treasure that in a way we both found. I would definitely say that was true for me. And that is the work of Rupert Sheldrake, which is well known, I think, in the integral world. Ken Wilber often talked about Sheldrake, but I never really, checked him out and found out what he had to say. And I just feel like I found another great integral teacher, actually. And so does Keith. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And just to sort of set the scene, one of the things that I emphasize here on the Daily Evolver is the limits of rational thinking. And this is, basic integral theory is that science comes along and does this amazing job of figuring out how everything works. I mean, you can't overstate the fruits of that. But at the same time, using quadrant theory, it wants to collapse everything into the right-hand quadrants. That is, it wants to explain the whole world in terms of exteriors, in terms of things that one can see and measure and particles, basically. And that there's no interior quadrants, which are the quadrants of non-material reality. And both in the individual in the upper left and the collective in the lower left, that is culture and consciousness. And that these things actually are reflective and connected and indeed part of the interior dimensions of the cosmos, the loving intelligence, for lack of a better word, or better two words. So anyway, Sheldrake he's a scientist, he's a physicist, he goes against this, he brings on these interior dimensions. And is basically, a good culture warrior for that. And I appreciate him because, I read these physicists and scientists and a lot of people very well regarded in the integral world. And I regard them well myself, like the big history people, Sam Harris, Naval Harari, even Dawkins, and of course, Bill Maher. But, bottom line is for them, nature is mechanical, that all animals and plants, it's all mechanical, basically. As Dawkins said, we're big lumbering robots, empty of meaning and purpose. And it seems so, arrogant to me in a way, and just, unnecessarily limited, that I wonder, am I characterizing these guys? Are they really more than this? And then along comes Brian Greene with his new book that's getting a lot of attention called Until the End of Time. And I listened to a good portion of it. And I have always really, do I love Brian Greene? No, it's a problem. I don't love Brian Greene, but I really like Brian Greene. And I read his book, The Elegant Universe, years ago. And he's a beautiful writer of all things, in terms of the cosmos. He's a string theorist, physicist himself, and a wonderful poetic writer. But, again, it's all mechanical and reductionist. And like just when I think I'm caricaturing these folks, along comes an article that I read in the recent Time magazine. You can see it here. And it is an interview with Brian Greene about his new book, because he's publicizing it like crazy and it's selling great. And, people are loving it. And like I said, I do too, in a way. But here's the problem. And I'm just going to read the first couple paragraphs. It's by Jeffrey Kluger. And he writes, "If you're feeling all dreamy about the universe, here's a pro tip. Don't tell Brian Greene. That guy can show your cosmic buzz fast. I recently swung by the office of the Columbia University theoretical physicist, full of happy, giddy questions, and came away pretty much empty. I wondered, is there such a thing as a natural moral order? I wondered. Not in this universe, there isn't. What about a purpose to the universe then? The reason the whole 3.8 billion year old shebang with its hundreds of billions of galaxies and trillions of planets happened in the first place? Nope, Greene says, no such purpose, adding, and that's okay. Surely though, Greene will grant the existence of free will, that first item on the wish list of every freshman year philosophy student who ever lived. Sorry, not a chance. And then he's quoting Greene. Your particles are just obeying their quantum mechanical marching orders, Greene says. You have no ability to intercede in that quantum mechanical unfolding. None whatsoever. Rather than feeling, damn, there's no universal moral order, or damn, there's no universal consciousness, he says, how wondrous is it that I am able to have this conscious experience, and it's nothing more than stuff. That stuff can produce Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. That stuff can produce the Mona Lisa. That stuff can produce Romeo and Juliet. Holy smokes, that's wondrous. And I guess it is, but it's empty. They're right in the first place. I come up empty with that. So anyway, there you have it. And I just find that so unnecessarily, I know it's probably necessary. It's probably necessary that humanity wring all of the magic out of the system, all of the great myth, all of the great stories, so that we can, because, that was no day at the beach either. And then we go forward where we can reintroduce the stories and the meaning. And I think that's part of the Integral Project. And apparently so does Rupert Sheldrake, and certainly Dr. Keith. So this is another episode of The Shrink and the Pundit, where we talk about Sheldrake's work and his book, I think called Setting Science Free. It's got a couple of different titles depending on where in the world you buy it. But it's Setting Science Free is the basic thesis, setting them free from reductionist materialism. So we sort of started the conversation before we really intended to. Keith and I were chatting, and we were actually chatting about attachment disorders. And then we realized that attachment is all about what Sheldrake's talking about, which is that there is a morphic field that we're all a part of, with each other, with different collectives, with whole populations, and with the cosmos itself, that these morphic fields exist. These are in the right or left-hand quadrants. And that mind is bigger than the brain. And the brain is a receiver, in a sense, for mind. And also a generator, however, and that there is a non-material reality. So anyway, I'm just going to start in with us talking about attachments, and then we'll move into Sheldrake. And I really enjoyed this conversation, and I think it hits the nail on the head about what is, what is the postmodern and postmodern views of what reality consists of. So anyway, Dr. Keith Witt and me, thanks for listening. Okay, here we go. It's Dr. Keith and me talking on Rupert Sheldrake. Thanks for listening.
And so when you're teaching people how to love each other, one of the things you're always monitoring is, are they connected, essentially attached? And when people are distressed, the first thing that happens, if you're observing it, is even though they're arguing, they're looking at each other, they're heated, they're disconnected. The psychological, the self-reflection and empathy circuits are cut. And it's fascinating seeing that happen.
Yeah.
And when people protest and go deeper, or they take off and discuss, those are strategies they're unconsciously invoking to try to get connected again. Very much like an infant protests or dissociates.
Oh, for heaven's sakes. Well, it's funny. It feels like that hits me in a whole new, fresh way, as you say it this time. And I'm not sure that some of that is not the fact that I've been reading Rupert Sheldrake.
Yes.
Which is the topic of our talk today.
Yes, it is.
And it's, one of my listeners, John Bartlett, suggested that I check him out. I've heard his name for years. I know he's an influence on Ken. Ken talks about him. But I never really read or looked into Sheldrake very much. And what I love is that he is explaining and from a scientific point of view, and he's Cambridge and Harvard and all kinds of accolades and that sort of thing, but he's a non-materialist.
Yeah.
And so his thesis is that mind is bigger than brain. We're not contained by this meat. There are morphic fields, which I've used that term, but to have him explain it is just so rich and makes me feel like there's just, like what you were just talking about, attachment, that there's just actually that liquid space, I often think of it, between us that is real. And the realer it gets, the better. You know what I mean? And
we have attractor states, probably. So what's a morphic field? It's not energetic. It's form. It's a form which in the morphic field, which is within and around whoever it is they're doing it, inside yourself or with us, where we're drawn to certain states with each other or with ourselves. That's the attractor state. And if we can't go one way, we'll find another way. And that's what Waddington called sharrods, those channels to the attractor state. And the fascinating thing to me around that is there are healthy and unhealthy attractor states. I've been talking forever about defensive states. Well, they protected us. They were healthy when we were 5 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7. They're not now, but they're still there.
Correct.
And couples who have a history together will have attractor states that they enter of distress that they practiced a lot. There's a field there with an attractor state, and they're trying that as they're trying to love each other, they're also trying to get to that place of being pissed off at each other and be disconnected. And it's totally confusing. And so understanding that in psychotherapy helps, because what you're doing is kind of a chiropractic adjustment. You're creating a new intersubjective state, a new morphic field of, if it's an individual, this is you thriving. I believe it. I see it. I feel it. Now you're feeling it and seeing it with me. We're co-creating that. And we strengthen it during the session, and then hopefully you strengthen it at home. That's still not as deep a gravity well, so to speak, as I'm worthless and, I deserve, nothing.
Right. Yeah.
But the more you practice it, the deeper it gets. And at a certain point, once it's a thing, once you can actually get into I'm a worthwhile person, you can create ceremonies of transition from the negative attractors, the destructive ones, to the positive ones. And that essentially is almost every trauma treatment there is, are those ceremonies of transition from a negative disconnected state, disconnected from ourselves or other people, to a positive connected state. And if we practice those, then our unconscious, our shadow self, will start doing it for us.
Yeah.
And that unconscious development, that's where I slightly disagree with Chad in terms of my understanding of shadow, but not that much. I mean, my understanding is really broad, and Ken disagrees with me, so Chad agrees more with Ken.
Well, we're all just sort of working our way forward here.
That's right.
But one of the things that I'm stuck on that you said is that this is not at least all or necessarily energetic, that there's actually, I'm thinking, an upper left component, quadrant-wise. Yes. It's just our interior state, non-material reality.
Yeah, yeah.
So let that sink in, because that's what it is. And these are these states, and they don't have any known material quality, but they are active between us. They're active with groups of people. They're active over history. They're somehow built into the cosmos in an interior, way. And that's just mind-blowing to me. I kind of have known that, but it feels like I'm getting a new, deeper transmission of it.
That's exactly my experience. It's radical subjectivity.
Yeah, radical subjectivity.
The radical subjectivity of the universe. He called it panpsychism. That happened before the Enlightenment. Everybody assumed that everything had spirit. And then you got dual materialism, where there's soul that has no material connections whatsoever, and everything else is material. It never made sense to the philosophers. When scientists grew to it, it was very much like the Dark Ages. If you meditated forever and went, oh, I am God, we're all God, and then you got burned at the stake. If you're a scientist or a physicist or a chemist or like Sheldrake, you get to the point, wow, there's a radical subjectivity in everything. And then the scientific community organizes to go, no, you're full of shit. The most interesting example of that with Sheldrake, two of them, were one, having his TED Talk banned.
Yeah.
And two, Dawkins, Mr. Selfish Gene, had a debate with him. And Sheldrake showed up to the debate and had sent Dawkins papers that had research about morphic fields and morphic resonance. Okay. And so he said, well, have you read the stuff I sent you? And Dawkins said, no, you're just on my show for me to disagree with you.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would be so embarrassed.
Yeah.
Dawkins saying, oh, you sent me your material and I didn't read it.
Yeah. Well, it turns out that the Sheldrake he's a culture warrior, actually. God bless him. But he's in the game against this, what he considers to be reflexive skepticism on the part of the media and the part of the scientific establishment in general. And I think that's true. And, one of the other things he helps me to see, which is, again, something I know, and that is that rationality and, the modern worldview is a worldview. It's not reality, and then we can talk about everything else and sort that all out in terms of that of the worldview of materialism. So what it helps me to see is that materialism, God bless it, in a way. Look what it's done for us, And I can see how humanity sort of always has to overshoot the target. But as you said, we go from, and as Ken said, we go from a world pre-modern where God is everywhere, saturating everything, including us and the devil too.
Right.
And we go to a world where God is nowhere. And it's just as, the political correctness there is just as strong as it is anywhere else. As I think I've said this before, but if you want to find out what materialist totalitarianism is, it's just everywhere. Go into your next business meeting and argue for your idea because God spoke to you in a burning bush.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
There
you go.
Yeah. And the longer you hold on to that story, the less you're going to be holding on to your job. And that's just, but that would have been a persuasive argument for most of human history, some version of that. And what I love about, what seems so thin to me about the materialism conquering everything or colonizing everything is that how it just throws out human history. It's just a delusion.
What?
Yeah.
Not to mention everybody's personal experience.
Yes.
What Greg says,
too.
when he talks to scientists off, out of the conference. I had the same experience with this exact experience with Alan Shore, famous neuroscience. He and I were in an elevator. I started talking to him about morphic fields. This was about 10 years ago. And he said, oh yeah, that makes really good sense to me. But I've listened to dozens of lectures by him, never mentioned anything like it from the stage. Why? Realistically, he would be attacked.
Yeah.
And he's an avant-garde guy. He's one of the biggest proponents of psychoanalysts, neuroscientists of attachment theory, going back to what you said. It really supports the idea that there's this vast unconscious that I call the adaptive unconscious shadow, of which now there's a layer of self-awareness. And in that layer of self-awareness, we have the human superpowers of focused intent and action and in service of principle and resolve. We can actually direct our own connection, our own attention. We can direct the formation of our own morphic fields. We can create alternative morphic fields that become more powerful. But then, obviously, we're part of something larger, some other energetic forms. And what he says in morphic resonance, he said, at every level, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts of whole, and he talks about holarchy just like Ken. And that the levels keep on going all the way up, all the way down. And nowhere is that more interesting to me in his book than with physics. Because what we've been finding out with physics is everybody thinks, well, magnetism and gravity are the bottom line. Well, apparently not. The Higgs boson means that in inertia is created by some kind of field, the Higgs boson field. He actually, a lot of physicists say there's a quintessence field out of which dark matter and dark energy arises. So apparently there's include and transcend energetic experiences of fields in the universe, most of which we really, in terms of quantity, most of which we really don't understand, but we know they exist. 73% of the universe is dark energy and 23% dark matter. And as the universe expands, there's more dark energy and dark matter because dark energy is equally distributed. Okay, that goes against the second law of thermodynamics. So local physics now changes on a cosmic level. And this gets back to this whole thing about the laws of physics aren't fixed. And this is what Ken says, they're habits. And I think Ken, he had a similar awakening that Ken did. It blew his mind, reorganized his understanding of the universe. He had a system that he could apply to all these questions that he's raised.
And we're talking about Rupert Sheldrake. We're also talking about Ken Wilber. Yeah, so keep going.
They had similar awakenings that then gave them a mission where the rest of their careers, you see both of them doing the same thing. Ken explaining the universe and exploring the universe through the integral epistemology, the meta theory. Sheldrake explaining the universe and exploring it through the concept of morphic resonance and morphic fields. Both of them very, very similar, of course.
Yep.
But
and both are mystics.
Both mystics.
I was looking at Sheldrake's website. His new book is all about spiritual. I'm just scratching the surface with this guy, but you could see, just the problem. I mean, I guess modernity had to wring all of the spiritual horseshit out of the system. Nobody,
like a wet rag.
Yeah, and nobody can make claims without evidence, and extraordinary claims need extraordinary evidence, and I get that, and thank God for that. But it's time to broaden here, and Sheldrake claims to have evidence that is just rejected by the skeptics, and again, he's in the game as a culture warrior in a way I don't feel called to. But, I do. I've always argued for what Sheldrake's talking about, more from a spiritual perspective. It's
Yeah,
like,
me too. And psychotherapy too.
yeah, exactly. It's just that, there's a spiritual tradition. I've experienced it. I always had the sort of Carl Jung thing that I don't believe in God, I know God.
Yeah.
I didn't always. I went through my militant atheist phase too. But, at some point you just get it or you don't. And then it just, in getting it, just illuminates your life so much. It just brings so much clarity and life force to your life that you wouldn't give it away. You can't be talked out of it. And which is why when I just read Sam Harris's Free Will. And it just sucks all the life out of the cosmos. I'm sorry.
I really have a problem with it. And I mean, no offense. I mean, he's contributing and he's teaching.
I love him.
And one thing I like about teaching in Brazil is I speak from God all the time, and they love it. Everybody has their own felt experience. We go there. The other world is something everybody is comfortable with. We do other world experiences. They're fine with it. When I'm talking about feeling God's pleasure when I'm doing the work, everybody knows what it's just a very different, very more psychotherapy in Brazil has no problem with the spiritual stuff. And so I'm kind of a natural fit I can see why they like my stuff so much.
Yeah.
We're kind of, I'm a natural fit over there.
Yeah. Well, I think that's arising I think there's a challenge to materialism that is really gaining a lot of force, even in the mainstream culture. And I'm happy to, Integral's at the forefront of that.
As it has
the
been.
idea of, there's an interior 2 quadrants that are part of reality that materialism misses.
Right.
So
what? Hold on for a second.
Okay.
Somebody's doing a construction project next door.
Well, how dare they?
I apologize, Jeff. You'll have to edit this out.
All good.
And it's funny when Ken is dismissed sometimes in critiques, it's because he has too much of a spiritual orientation. And I think one of the things that happens is Ken talks a lot about spirit because that's what's been underemphasized in the world.
Yeah.
And, and talks about the intersubjective influencing us. The whole concept of every social holon is larger than the sum of its parts and is guided by a morphic field that has attractor states and desires to go to those attractor states. There is a Black woman, I forget her name, who went to a Trump rally, and she reported on it. And I found it utterly fascinating what she said. She said, first of all, everybody went out of their way to be nice to her. I mean, really nice. We're not racist. Second of all, it wasn't poor people. That it was a lot of people with good cars. She looked in the parking lot. She says, "Well, there's a lot of new trucks and SUVs here." Thirdly, she said they really helped Trump talk. That he would be kind of faltering, and somebody in the audience would say, "Lock her up," and he'd start talking about Hillary. And somebody else would say, the border wall, and he'd start talking about the border wall. That they were there basically reassuring themselves, we're nice amber people, and we really understand what other people don't understand, that we're being threatened, and that the progressives don't really get us, they despise us, and they don't realize we're being threatened. And it reminded me what my conformist cousin once said. He said, when I was talking to him about something and I was too persuasive, he said, "I understand us now, Keith." I said, "Oh, really?" He said, "I'm a realist and you're an idealist." And I thought, okay, that's how you can effectively dismiss any data that comes from me. And that comes from what Bina and Suzanne, Bina Sharma and Suzanne Cook-Ruder call the 3.5 level of development. The level right between 3 and 4, where you think you're a scientist, but you have such confirmation bias that you're using your intelligence to block new data.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where pathological orange shows up and also becomes gullible orange.
Yeah.
And I think there's fields associated with that are accessed by the groups and by leaders in the group, depending upon what they're promoting.
Well, I think we've just witnessed a stunning example of a morphic field happening in real time, which was Joe Biden after South Carolina.
I was thinking the same thing when I was listening to you and Terry and Diane talk. I was thinking that just happened overnight.
Yeah. No, there was an organization of the mind of the people who vote the Democratic primary, however you want to define them, that where it all just made sense. It was all came clear. It's the thing to do. And not only did that happen, it happened in spades.
Yeah.
You know,
and
so that's, this helps explain that, because there's a field, and it's not energetic. It also is energetic.
Yeah.
But it's also state,
It's a form, the way that
non-material form.
It's a non-material form that influences quantum fields and electromagnetic fields, the form. It's very similar. There's that famous speech from Roosevelt. The only thing we have is fear itself. That Colbert is always parodying.
The only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Fear itself. Okay, so right after World War II, and now right after Pearl Harbor, there was a coalescence of a isolationist America at that point. We got to do something about all this, and there was a sudden change. And I have a feeling that a lot of people, when Biden showed a little bit, they went, okay, we really feel, this is progressives now, we feel an existential threat. And now the field formed, and we got, I think Biden is gonna go through for that reason.
I'm keeping my fingers crossed behind my back and toes. But yes, go Joe, go. I'm all in.
Yeah. I know, God.
I know. Well, we got to go with the guy we got here, and it looks like that. And I think part of it was that the sort of, again, this psychic morphic field of it's inevitable for Bernie.
Yeah.
That was just came double-digit lead. There's insurmountable, and so it's just interesting to watch how quickly this happens, particularly now in an interconnected world where we have the lower right quadrant. We have the technology of everybody has a megaphone, and how that works, and that it's just fascinating to see evolution happening in real time here.
Well, and also our human need to be resonated with.
Yes.
Yes. You and I, as we talk, okay? So say 10 people listen to this and go, wow, that's pretty cool. And I'd find out and go, wow, I'm glad 10 people listened and it was pretty cool. But say 10,000 people listen and go, it's cool. I go, wow, to me, that's more cool than 10.
Yeah.
That I have a human need to have that particular field that has a certain kind of ambient, a certain kind of upper left and lower left illuminance to it. I have a real need to be resonated with other people. And actually, this is what brought a lot of people to Integral, a real fear that there isn't anybody resonating with me out there.
Yeah.
And so we find people that are resonating with us, wham, first of all, we're reassured. Second of all, we're contributing to that field. And that's what in that morphic fields, we're influenced by them, but we're contributing to them every second.
Yeah. And we could see the increased power as the field continues to evolve. And here I would argue for, the emergence of integral consciousness. I think it's happening, well, here's an example. Pete Buttigieg. Pete Buttigieg, who's the, gay mayor of a town of 100,000 in the Midwest.
Also the white Obama.
Yeah, well, exactly. And then Obama too. So, I think we can both agree that these guys are functionally integral, in really important ways. It's astonishing how the culture just drank them up.
I love that.
And continues to. Obama's two-term president, Pete Buttigieg is a major national political figure just by being in some interviews and making integral sense. Harmonizing, multi-perspectival, head and heart. Friendly to reality. It's not that hard.
I loved what he said about what he'd do about the Senate. I mean, I never heard anybody say that before.
Remind me.
They said, well, what do you do if, Mitch McConnell is still stopping anything from happening in the Senate? He'd say, well, I'm the president. I'm going to go to the senators who are the Republican senators that are blocking, and I'm going to have a rally in their state or and I'm going to go out and campaign like crazy to find really good candidates to run against them, and then campaign my brains out to get those candidates elected. I've never heard anyone say that before running for president. That's what they would do about the divided government.
Yeah.
And he actually has something that would have an impact, and that would have an impact.
Yeah, well, it's actually the conscious, evolved use of red. You go out there and exercise power.
Well, as we know, red and amber don't listen to you unless you provide external constraint first.
Yeah.
That's the nature. You know, the morphic fields, that is a little confusing to me, that there are fields of morphic resonance that are destructive fields. And I think the way that it works is you have to objectify other people to do it. Okay? I think that when you have a morphic field with other people, it has to feel, you know, I wrote a book once that I never published called Mindful Manifestation. You know, yearn, discern, and act to create everyday miracles. It was about manifestation systems, because all the manifestation systems had the same steps. I thought, well, I'll write a book about it. So I, wrote the book. And anyway, one of those things was you had to have an elevated affect. And this is what some of the trauma people say these days too. Pierre Genet said that about trauma originally. People haven't finished the trauma to a state of triumph. Don Wood says, or Joe Dispenza says, you have a vision of what you want with an elevated affect. How do people have elevated affects when they're destructive fields? They objectify other people. That's how they do it. So we're all good people. There's these objects on the other side that threaten us. We have to push against those objects or attack those objects. They're not people, they're objects.
Right.
And I think that's how you can maintain the integrity of that field. Now, if you're someone who's green or teal, you see that objectification and you have a moral reaction to it. And
I think you do a teal, and I'm not so sure about green, Keith. If my progressive friends demonize the right,
so they're objectifying the right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But that's built in first tier. There's the one thing I would sort of counter a little bit is that the idea of a destructive force changes. It's like what your friend who went to the Trump rally noticed is that these people actually want to be seen and to be good, not as a ruse, because they actually are good by their own lights.
Yeah, they're not Machiavellian. Trump's Machiavellian.
Trump's red. These guys are amber, blue, whatever, traditional. So, and destruction also is just a necessary creative force in evolution. That if you're the one being destroyed, it ain't so great. But I would actually argue that part of the morphic field after Obama particularly was like, okay, enough perspective taking already. It's like Chuck at about 6 o'clock in the evening. He's like, okay, I've had enough perspectives for the day,
Good for Chuck. That's just healthy intimacy right there. Setting a boundary for your fiveness. Jeff, I've had enough fiveness. Let's just watch TV and eat popcorn. Have a good time, okay? Please.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's something, well, it's a little different, but the reaction to that with Trump. And that there's actually, when integral history is written about Trump, well, notice that he's red and he's egocentric and he's all of the authoritarian and all those things. But we'll also see that there was a healthy countering of the globalism, just that the mindset of orange and multicultural totalitarianism in green that was healthy and what was necessary to move us into integral. Not that we're not taking the best of both of those, all three of them forward.
Yeah.
But that it's not just the right, they fight differently. They have a less complex, mental structure, but I don't know anyway, what do you think?
Well, first of all, I agree. Second of all, I think the evidence of it is in the lack of actual physical violence in the world.
Yeah.
I mean,
And in this country.
and in
You
this
compare
country-
this culture war with the one we had in the 60s and a lot fewer dead bodies.
yeah, and compare that with the ones, but as we go back in history,
please.
there's more and more dead bodies. Okay,
Yeah.
less and less dead bodies.
Yeah.
And so there's a morphic field of nonviolence now that kind of is around the globe, and even the people that do violence do it in a very limited fashion. I mean, Russia's allowing itself to really be contained at Ukraine. They're not really pushing that.
I know. It's true.
I think that's a field, a human field of we're really seeing people as more valuable. We don't that it means something to kill a human being.
Yeah.
We don't want to send armies.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the evidence of what you're describing.
Yeah. And part of it is a skin arising around the globe in really all countries, even the less developed countries, of modern people, a modern group of people who get it and who want to be part of the world systems and of course the internet and all of that stuff. And that is, again, it's like materialism as a worldview. It thinks that it's the only thing. And there's a whole culture of people who are still ethnocentric and actually pre-modern.
Oh, yeah.
They're pre-rational in their hearts. I mean, they want to believe a big myth about their people and themselves. And they do, actually. They do believe that. And they're not going to go gently into that good night.
Well, Sheldrake's point is that a whole bunch of people who I self-identify as pure rational are doing exactly the same thing. These 10 things that he mentions about that people just accept, like the laws of nature are immutable. Oh, really? So the speed of light changed by 20 kilometers a second in the 50s, and gravity changed 1.5%. Well, I guess it's not immutable. I guess there's something weird going on. There's no evidence that we can find specific memories in the brain. Lots of evidence that there's fields, transtemporal fields, that are accessed through switching centers in our brain, and that we change those fields when we change memories. Because a lot of evidence about changing memories. Almost all trauma work involves reactivating memories in a felt way, and then reconsolidating them in a way that's more integrated. I mean,
and you think that's happening outside the brain and body of the person being treated?
I think that there's a credible case being made by Sheldrake for an alternative explanation, since we can't find a place in the brain where there are specific memories. We can find places in the brain that are associated with different sense organs. We can find places in the brain associated with trauma. Can't find a place in the brain associated with specific memories. And also, there's a lot of evidence that perception is bidirectional. Sheldrake did a lot of research with this. People know when they're being stared at. So that means that when you're looking at something, you're not just receiving, you're projecting. What are you projecting? Okay, what is that? I mean, what energy is that? Why can we rely on again and again and again? They did it with closed circuit TV. 55% of the time people knew when they were being stared at. That is way statistically significant. That's 1 in a million statistically significant. That's not like the 5% level. So there are things happening that we don't understand that suggest energetic relationships between consciousness, that consciousness knows consciousness and feels it.
Yeah.
And that we affect what we perceive. Animals feel it when we look at them.
Yeah. Well, I love that he wrote a book on animals.
Yeah. Dogs that know when your masters are coming home.
Dogs that know when their masters are coming home. Yes. And, every dog owner has that experience of, when it's Chuck, they act different way before he gets here.
And they don't know when he's going to get there.
Yeah. No, it's really an amazing thing. And what I love about it is that, when we think of integral consciousness as taking the best of the previous 6 memes, or however you want to slice and dice it,
Yeah.
There's actually, in the animal nature, this liquid space is just really evident because there's not a lot of layers laid on top of it. And so this telepathy that we seem to have with animals and that they have with each other, in which he expounds on at length, homing pigeons, animals lactating when their offspring are in trouble a mile away.
Yeah.
This kind of mothers doing that. It just, it enchants the world.
He sees evolution as the interplay between habits and creativity. And so he sees animals as surrendered essentially to habits with some consciousness, some self-aware consciousness. And some animals actually recognize themselves in the mirror, the higher order ones, the ones with the von Economo neurons, the big spindle cell neurons.
Interesting.
And of course, given that, that's not just, there's just lots of evidence. That's not just genes. That's some kind of energetic memory that he believes is transtemporal, and there's evidence about it. And that when we have a desire to, and this is one of his things, like people say evolution isn't directional. Apparently that's not accurate according to every evidence that we've seen. When people are directing their own evolution, they direct it towards deeper consciousness and more compassion. All the developmental lines converge as you ascend them, suggesting there's an attractor state, probably I suspect of pure unity. And that from the way you get to pure unity is more compassion and deeper consciousness. And the more we go there, the stronger that state is, because so many people over the years, over human history, have gone there with such joy, such triumph, such love, that it's a field that's drawing us.
Absolutely.
And every seeker knows this.
Yes.
Every seeker knows I'm being drawn by something. The omega point, that Teilhard talked about.
Yes.
He felt it in his heart.
Yes. Yes. I always love the Bible verse that for every step you take towards God, he takes 77 towards you.
I wonder where they got that number.
Yeah. I don't know. And I think I'm probably misquoting it, but it's something like that. And I catch the drift.
Yeah.
That the cosmos responds to our seeking. It responds to our love. It responds to the feeling of being loved and seen.
Which is
precious in this whole system.
So in psychotherapy, if you do factor analysis, 15% of the benefit is placebo. Well, placebo is just a word. Nobody has ever explained it. But maybe what placebo is that people are creating fields of health by taking their pill or by talking to someone who loves them or cares about them, wants to understand them. And then that field then is creating a new attractor state that they start growing towards, that is actually connecting with other people that are healthy in that fashion. And that's who we want to identify with. I don't want to identify with the people that are miserable and heading towards suicide.
Right.
I want to identify with the people that are happy and heading towards a fulfilling, joyful, connected life. Well, as I do that, the closer I go, that's a form of God right there. The closer I go, the more I'm being drawn by that field.
Yeah.
The more I feel like I participate in that field. And after a while, I identify with that field. So when I go, speaking of self and other, when I go back to depression and into suicide, it doesn't feel like me anymore. It feels, oh no, I'm depression going to suicide. That's when, at that point where psychotherapy can give you a bridge. Well, I need to get back to, fulfillment, going towards more love. And here's the bridge. You do the visualization, you do the contemplative practice, connection with another person.
Yes. And the morphogenic field helps us to realize how these practices are real.
Yeah.
And that thoughts are things.
Yes,
and that liberation is, a real thing. And it's not just some, I haven't read this, but I'm about to listen to it. Sam Harris's book on waking up. I'm just afraid he's going to disenchant the process of spiritual practice, but we'll see.
Well, yeah, partly I have a problem that my book on integral psychotherapy is called Waking Up. So,
Oh,
I'm bummed that, he took my title, It's like, come on.
that rat.
Of course, there's a
Yeah.
lot of books called Waking Up. So there you
Yeah, I
go.
suppose so.
I haven't read it yet. I think that you kind of have to tie yourself in knots when you want to avoid data. Okay?
Well, when you want to avoid consciousness as just an illusion, a delusion, an epiphenomena.
There's just
What
so
a
much,
waste!
and
Jesus.
also there's so much data to the contrary. It's like Dawkins not reading those papers from
Yeah.
Sheldon. One thing that integral does for us is it creates a radical openness. And the radical openness isn't just means we receive everything. The radical openness is we notice things like me getting irritated at Sam for using the same title as my book. And I know when I do that I'm more likely to be dismissive because I have that little competitive thing. These days, that makes me more likely to check out Waking Up and his book and read it.
Yeah.
Because I know that resistance is Keith's ego resisting new data for egoic reasons.
I know. I mean, it's the sort of the booby prize when you really think it through.
Of course.
Holding on to, one of my therapists used to say, holding on to my precious turd.
It's mine.
Yeah,
I've had it forever.
Yeah. But no, actually, this kind of resistance and having a reaction is a sign to look closer, not to,
Exactly.
defend. And it's not always easy, and I don't always do it, but at least I know that that's the way to go.
Well, I think one of the things that integral psychotherapy does is the understanding that development and seeking and everything is a lifelong process of personal evolution. I was talking to a guy who's a famous teacher in this area, and about something that he was dealing with, some personal thing where he was kind of resisting going to the next level. And I said, in this era, in this age, you can't be a teacher who coasts. You can't be like a Trump who says, my teaching is so great that I can rationalize, me, screwing up in other areas, or a Maharishi, or those guys. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You in previous ages in human history, you could do that. Okay, and the people who didn't, Ramana Maharshi and stuff, were extraordinary, and people thought, well, they're just different types of people. It wasn't that they were different types of people. Is that there's a consciousness now of, doesn't matter how great my transmission is, I personally have a growth edge. And if I don't attend to my growth edge, my students might not suffer, my clients might not suffer, they might not feel it, but I'll suffer. And so if I want to be in integrity, I have to commit myself to that. And that means I have to deal with whatever's uncomfortable now. And if I don't, I can feel myself being a hypocrite. I can feel myself
contracting and slowing down. And, you realize that enlightenment, I still have to wrap my head around this, but enlightenment's a verb.
Yeah.
It's not a noun, it's not a state, it's the process of continuing to become the next Jeff.
Which is a field.
Wants to come online. And I'm sure as a psychotherapist, how helpful is that to know that there's this next person wants to come online sitting in front of you, and that that's happening under its own power.
It's so helpful. It's, I've always visualized people doing well. That's always been, therapists are guides. So but also, they're like car mechanics. I mean, that was one of the things that I really liked when you were talking earlier with Chad. There are multiple functions that we do. Okay. So if I'm dealing with someone's trauma, I'm kind of being partly a guide, but also partly a car mechanic. I'm reorganizing, neurological things, physiological things. The idea that I'm also accessing and co-creating morphic fields, and these are not just morphic fields for this person and me. There are morphic fields of people happy and thriving and joyful and growing forever. That we access the more that we surrender to them, and then they help us. They contribute to us. They contribute. The morphic field of therapists wide open to helping people grow is a field that I contribute to and I'm nourished by. I'm not by myself there. And my clients not by themselves, and the couples aren't by themselves. So that sense of radical connectedness and energetically leaning towards the beautiful, good, and true, and all the data that supports it really helps organize and guide us as psychotherapists.
Yes. I mean, it's one of the things that Sheldrake emphasized is the materialist attitude that the universe is meaningless.
Yeah.
But this is the opposite of that. It's like everything you're doing for you and your client is for you and your client primarily, but it's also for the whole system, and for all of humanity and for future humanity, for next humanity.
And I'm dedicated to supporting the evolution of consciousness. That's kind of an organizing principle, but it's kind of a mystery to me why I am. I mean, why?
Good question. Good
point.
Why
is that a sacred thing? I don't know. It is. I have faith in it. I have utter faith that supporting the evolution of consciousness is a beautiful, good, and true thing. That it's a guide of my life purpose that makes perfect sense on every level to me. But there's no rational reason why. It's kind of a mystery.
It is.
Why that's such a great thing.
Yes.
That's us listening, resonating with an attractor state that we don't quite understand, I think.
Right.
But we know it's great.
Yes.
So we're yearning for it.
Yes. And
when I do my meditations, when I get to the ninth chakra, there's a couple of figures that show up, Krishna, Avalokiteshvara. And I play with them. They came up in meditations. And on the far side of them, I say, well, where is your connection to the infinite? And they go, we can't really explain that to you, Keith. But what we can say is the closer we get to you, the more attached we are to physical reality. The more we enjoy sex and food, and nature and play. We really like that, okay? And I go, sure, you can do it through me anytime that you want. And I can feel them taking pleasure in, sex and food and swimming and nature and healing and stuff. But then there's this other side of them that's connected to some mystery that they understand and they guide me from. But they basically let me know your consciousness cannot comprehend this, but you can be influenced by it. And we're a bridge for you. And why are we a bridge for you? Well, it's not because our names were originally Krishna and Avalokiteshvara. I don't know where they came from, but those are names I gave them. Because they're fields, they're energy that I'm resonating with. And the only way that I can understand them is then when they take form as some kind of individual consciousness. Beyond that, I'm sure they lose that. But they're real. They're not I'm not making them up. Or
right.
If I am, my relationship with them is like my relationship with you at this point.
Yeah. Well, hallelujah.
Hallelujah.
That's beautifully said and transmitted, and it's just a wonderful example of how moving from materialism does not mean going back to great mythic, religions and doctrines and dogmas. It's about the felt experience of, opening to the enchantment of the world,
Joseph Campbell said that. He said, if you take all the myths as metaphors, in other words, people felt spirit and they felt the archetype.
Yes.
They felt them and they knew they were real. And so what they did is they projected themselves into them. And then what they saw was what they projected, and it created a form of giants and the hero's journey and the monsters. Okay, if you understand that those are metaphor for real phenomena that we can't understand except through metaphor, but that we can feel and that we yearn for. If you accept that, then the myths guide us.
Yes.
And Jung kind of did the same thing.
Yes. Yeah. And instead of explaining them away as a delusion, evolutionarily potent because it helped us to form larger group bonds.
Yeah, right.
Jesus Christ.
No, that's true, but
I mean, it's true, of course, but it's half the story at best.
Well, if you look back probably at your education, you and I had great educations. I mean, I had a lot of young teachers. I had a lot of new schools. It was back at a time when there were a lot of skills that you had to learn: critical analysis, science, grammar, all that kind of stuff. I look back at all those experiences. The thing that bothered me about it is at the time, and I look back and I see why when I was a teenager, I rebelled against it and went crazy. It was a field of scientific materialism. You know, my father was a biology teacher. I mean, it was like, there's no spirit, Keith.
Right.
If you, all this stuff, there's no spirit. There's fiction. It was kind of like dual materialism. There's fiction, and then there's reality. Okay? And so if you're going to read a book like anything, you know, like Dune, that's just fiction. That's not reflecting anything that's happening here. And I went, God damn it, it just doesn't feel right. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever to me. And what martial arts did for me is gave me a way, an opening where I could get through that into something else. Because martial arts said, all that stuff is bullshit. You can have superpowers. And, you know, then I trained with people who had superpowers. I went, okay.
And it was obvious. It was in the right-hand quadrants. It was actually happening in material form.
I can see those superpowers, and they're teachable.
Yeah.
Okay. And so what do? Well, you got to meditate before you work out. Okay. You got to do all these things endlessly. Okay. You got to have a certain consciousness. Okay. You know, you got to have radical openness to new stuff. Okay. Well, when I started doing psychotherapy and studying, those things kind of led me into, okay, these things are missing from my classes and from the books, but I can see them there. And then that guided me to other stuff. And I think one great thing about this age is that there's less of a jump for that. You know, people can listen to you and me talk or read other books and so on. Or we can talk, Sam Harris, hopefully maybe, you know, read the book and let's have the three of us talk.
Yeah, I think we should actually read it and talk about it. But
yeah, I'll do that.
Yeah, that's a deal.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I was just going to say, it's interesting to hear your trajectory through, because anytime I hear somebody's story through basically some version of losing your religion, at least in the way that we were taught it, and you go into martial arts. I just went into hardcore atheism, you know, so I was out there, you know, pounding the pavement for atheists. And I do think that, you know, where we can place materialism is, you know, first of all, or again, to repeat, what great fruits it brought to us in terms of the material world. But also that there is a, that it's basically the collective experience of losing our religion that probably humanity had to go through and still has to go through in many ways, that it just lets us be friendlier to the process instead of having the idea that just shouldn't be happening, you know.
You know, developmentally, if you watch an infant grow, when the infant stops crawling and starts to stand, or when the infant starts to talk, there's a disorganization of their previous way of being, but they haven't reorganized to another one yet. And when that happens, the kid's irritable. They're kind of pissed off. They're kind
I see where you're going here.
They're uncomfortable. They haven't, the other way isn't working. This is Thomas Kuhn, you know, the structure of scientific revolutions. They're not comfortable yet, but they're reaching for that paradigm that fits better.
Right.
Walking fits better. Talking fits better. Theory of mind fits better. You know, like concrete operational so on. And I think we're in it, and you know, maybe that's the whole thing about 10%. Yeah. Maybe when 10% of the population is integral, maybe there's a field that's robust enough that it starts really sucking in exit green people.
Yeah.
You know,
I think it's real close in, you know, at the leading edge at least. Mm-hmm. I think Obama and Pete are my two examples I'm going to hold on to. And you know, and just where I see it all over the place. I mean, they haven't heard of integral, but they are tired of the same old left-right arguments and, you know, the polarity that exists. So,
well, I'm very struck by how good people are when I talk to them,
Yes,
independent of legal
absolutely.
stuff. And when I balance that against my reflective anger at the super conservative agenda, I go, there's me objectifying. There, I'm just doing it. I feel generic anger. I'm not dealing with them as human beings, complex human beings. And it's fascinating to see it rise in me. That
me
that
too.
anger and that red thing. I want to.
Me too.
And I do know they need external constraint, but I also know that it has to be compassionate and democratic.
Yeah.
I just like in psychotherapy. I'll be working with, and I see it most in couples. Couples are really cruel to each other when they get into their stuff. I mean, they're cruel, Jeff. They say really mean things.
Oh.
I mean, they just, they're just being nasty to each other. They're trying not to be, and they are. Okay. And it's not because they're cruel, mean, sadistic people. Those people hardly ever make it in my office, and they don't stay in therapy.
Right.
I mean, it's like,
why would I be here?
If you're a real psychopath, what is your motivation? Come see Keith unless it's court ordered. And I don't take anybody who's court ordered.
Yeah,
okay?
fair enough.
Okay. And so they're caught up in that, not wanting to do it. And so as I see that, and I see that inside they're doing that, basically trying to be loved by being cruel.
I know.
But that's just all of us. And so I have the great thing about being a therapist is I have the contract. You cannot do that. You have to stop being cruel. And now you have to understand there's a deeper message that you're trying to give. That's not a cruel message. It's a request for love that is being couched in an attack, sometimes a vile attack.
Yeah. And
now you need to apologize for that vile attack. But look, let's go with the request for love. Let's see if that can create something. Yeah. And quite often it can. Yeah. And then it happens. It's there. There's this little new state, little, delicate little morphic field. It lasts maybe a minute or two. And then somebody says something and bam, they go back to the old attractor state, back to cruelty. And a lot of therapy is like catching that with couples anyway, catching that and then making the adjustment, teaching. Yeah.
Because otherwise you're going to be feeding the cruel morphic field.
Exactly.
And we could see that. It's just basic common sense. You say things that you can't take back. The other person heard them. I mean, there you are for the rest of your life. You've said that.
Most of the main injuries that happen with couples are said 2 or 3 minutes into the argument when people are distorted. It's rarely the first couple of things.
Interesting.
Now with individuals, they'll go into the I'm worthless, death looks good.
It's one of the sort of collateral damage of materialism again.
That's exactly right.
There's no God. I'm an accident of evolution, hurtling through space on a rock. None of it means anything. Jesus Christ, I want to kill myself.
One of the reason we all like the Enneagram is based on the idea that there's 9 flavors of connection to God that we've been blocked from. And that we put our personality in there to try to fill up those holes rather than reach through our personality to connect with God. And why is the Enneagram so popular compared to all the other personality types? None of the other personality typology systems organizes itself around disconnection with God, from God.
Yeah, that's spiritual dimension.
That's the foundation of the Enneagram. I'm an Enneatype 6. Holy faith and holy strength are the connections to God that I've been looking for my entire life. And the more that I have my connections to holy faith and holy strength, the more everything makes sense and the less Keith's personality makes decisions. And the more God makes decisions through Keith. Just like it's holy truth for an 8 and it's holy omniscience for a 5.
That's me.
That's huge, yeah. Holy omniscient.
I want to be wholly omniscient. But no, the Enneagram is just, magical.
And there's
has spiritual potency for sure.
And there's fields associated not just with our type, but with the highest functioning of our type connected to God.
Yeah.
Okay, so once we have a few touches with that field, we can reach to that field. That creates an attractor state. Remember, when we can surrender to an attractor state, our unconscious, our adaptive unconscious, our shadow self is now organized to find a way there. If we can't find one way, we'll find another way. If this therapist doesn't work, I'll try this practice. If this intuitive practice doesn't work, I'll try this. Because I felt it there, I'm feeling for it. And if I'm organized that way, I can direct we're the only people that can do this. I can direct, humans, we can direct our consciousness towards it. And the closer we get, the more connected we are with that field, and the more that field is supporting us on our journey.
Yeah. Wow. That's beautiful testimonial. And again, with this Rupert Sheldrake, I feel like I've stumbled onto a vein of gold. And
me too.
I'm going to keep up with him and check out a couple more of his books. And I encourage all our listeners to do the same and let us know what you think.
Watch his TED Talk.
Yeah, watch his TED Talk. Oh, that's an interesting cultural phenomena.
And he's got that English Don thing, that wry sense of humor, that erudite accent, the impeccable references and intelligence.
Yes.
Like you look at that, there's just something so persuasive about that whole delivery.
Yeah.
Like, God, like he could say almost anything and I would find it credible. And he was barefoot.
Is that right? Interesting. Well, he went to the ashram in India as a young man, and he's got a whole spiritual path and practice. But the TED Talk, it's worth mentioning. It was, I think, 2013. I remember commenting on it at the time, but I had sort of forgotten about it. But he did a TED Talk on science set free, which is science set free from materialism. Yeah. And it provoked the ire of some materialists, and Ted banned it, took it off the site.
Right.
It was like a very controversial thing. And then there was all this blowback, and then they put it back. And there's this whole, you could check it out. Rupert Sheldrake's banned TED Talk. And you can link to all kinds of things. It was very fascinating, just as a cultural phenomena to see.
Sheldrake called the head of TED, right? I forget the guy's name. And talked to him, and the guy was just embarrassed. You talked to Sheldrake, he was so embarrassed. He put it back on, he just tried to make it all disappear because he realized he was part of one of these stories where you don't want to be that part of the story.
Right.
Where he was being the dick.
Banning.
The story.
Banning the Harvard, Cambridge, biologist.
Because a couple of scientism enthusiasts gave him a hard time, and he banned him without getting him, without listening to him. It was like, you could just feel his chagrin. He says, well, let's make it all giveaway. No, you're not banned anymore, but sorry, the story now exists. It's too good a story.
I know.
You and me, we're telling the story, Jeff.
Exactly. It's funny the way we stumble our way forward.
That's true.
All right.
Well,
anything else we need to put on the table here, Keith?
No, I think that was the part of it. That's the part of it that expanded my consciousness of this unexpectedly. Mm-hmm. And I guess that's my old scientific materialism in me.
Yes, me too.
That hadn't stretched as far as it could stretch, and got stretched farther by this.
Exactly. All the stuff that that's a spiritual realm. Fair enough. But we can access it through thought and reason, experimentation, and a new science that's not limited to the exterior quadrants.
And so, what makes me think is, Jeff, you and I aren't going to stop doing this.
No.
We're going to keep discovering stuff like this and talking about it.
Yes. Let's do our next one on Sam Harris's Waking Up.
Done. I will read it, and we will do it. I'm good with that.
That's a deal.
All right.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening to another episode of The Shrink and the Pundit.